Today at Franchise City, we're going to go behind the scenes of the Subway franchise and look at how they built the biggest franchise brand in the world. We've got an amazing interview today with Ralph Piselli. He's a key figure in building one of the most iconic franchise brands in the world, Subway, that recently sold for $9.6 billion. And Ralph was instrumental in building Subway. And before we get started, here is a video of Fred DeLuca, founder of Subway, speaking to Ralph's contributions to the company.
Struggling every day to build the company, finding the going was tough. Then we hired someone, and we often wonder if he's the reason why Subway has grown the way it has. It's grown over 100-fold since Mr. Ralph Piselli joined the company.
Ralph looks familiar. You may have seen him in the movies. Ralph has also done some acting, working alongside big names like Vince Pastore of Sopranos fame and the late Tom Sizemore.
Ralph, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. So let's start off right at the beginning. You were with Subway from the very early days before all of that monumental growth started off. I'd be interested to know, how did you get started with Subway?
When I started in 1984, there was about 300 locations. And they had run an ad looking for a sales rep. And, when I was just finishing up video school, making the transition from the restaurant industry to video, and then I saw the ad, I was familiar with Subway, and I said, you know what, let me go check it out. So I went there, I applied for the job, I got the interview, I gave my resume when I met with the Dick Potion, who was the very first Subway franchisee, and he's the one who hired me. So during the interview, he says, yeah, I see that you worked at this restaurant for X amount of years, the head chef. And I go, oh yeah. I go, and you used to, and I said, Subway came there a lot, and I used to cook for you guys for your dinners for when you had your parties, and you used to have all these events they had there. And so he was taken back by that, how well I remember. And I said, yeah, I remember what room you used to take for years. And so, he went on to say, hey, we love the food. That's why we always went back there. Sometimes I wonder if that helped me get in. And then years later, I found out that Fred DeLuca and Dr. Buck used to come in on Monday nights alone, nothing to do with the company functions. They used to come there Monday nights to have their weekly business meetings. And Mondays were slow, and I was the only person cooking on Monday nights. So it was weird. I found out, so I told Fred, I said, when I found out, I go, Fred, I used to work Monday nights. I used to cook for you and Dr. Buck. I never knew that. He goes, I didn't know that. He goes, what a coincidence.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. So yeah, not what you know, it's who you know. That's very fortuitous. Funny how life works out sometimes there. So you were essentially kind of number two guy.
There was the vice president of marketing, Dick Potion.
Yeah.
There was another person that was there before me, but their role was sales and everything else. And then that was the first person hired 100% solely to be focused on franchise sales.
Right.
And that's it.
Right. So they figured, hey, we got 300 locations. Let's get serious. This is something that could take off, right? It's funny to think of Subway 300 locations, right? What are they, like 27,000? I think
they reached 44,000 at one point
globally. Yeah.
Yeah. And at that time, that was the year that they made the announcement that they were going to open 5,000 locations in 10 years by 1994.
Yeah, I'm sure that must have, yeah, we'll get back to that. That's, I'm sure a figure that a lot of people sort of had their jaw drop at that point. But what was it you were doing there? Your formal role, what did they bring you on exactly to do? Just the franchise sales, or was there anything else?
Strictly franchise sales. That's it. Only handling the people who inquired. They did, a lot of advertising. And then interestingly enough, there was a lot of people who would go into the restaurants that were really impressed what they saw. And there was mini brochures on the counter and phone numbers on a napkin. There was no internet at the time. And people would, send in the mini brochure, call up, from the napkin. And that, along with ads, together began to generate a high number of interest. And that began the growth. You will never believe how many people bought franchises who are people who actually saw the phone number on a mini brochure or on a napkin.
What was it like, the culture in the early days? I would imagine it's quite a bit different than how it ended up. But what was that culture like at the beginning, and did it change over time?
Yes, the culture at one point and then how it transitioned down the road is interesting. So the culture when I started was very family oriented. You know, Fred DeLuca, Dr. Buck, everyone's heard the story. And, when you would come into work in the morning, Fred's mother used to be was the receptionist. And so she was there every day. Fred was there working. Fred's wife, Elizabeth, she was there helping out. She worked in the company. Dick Pilsham being the family friend and was the first Subway first Subway employee. And he was there working and he was heavily involved. And so it was interesting to see all these people that were dedicated for decades. This is like 1965 it started, 1984, it's 19 years, and they're all still there actively doing something and working. So they were committed to this. Then from there, as the company grew and it got more popular and got a lot more attention, then the company began to make some changes is to try to transition into a much more professional company, and that point where, consultants were brought in to give advice, which was not something that normally was done. So they reach out to get more information to find out things. And then from there, they started working on upgrading the team and then hiring professional advertising agencies to help out, which all of this made a tremendous change. And then it moved it, but it never took away from the family run oriented thing because it was a very interesting combination that it was, first it was family oriented. And then at the same time, it was about the team. Fred always saying that we're the best team in franchising history. So you have a team and then you have a family. Usually the two are not together because they're kind of different. In a team, you find the best players and you remove the worst players, like a baseball team. The team with the best players wins. A family, you can't just fire your family members.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a combination that how Fred did it, and it worked. It was unique, and it worked. And I think that was part of the unique culture that he established that made the company what it became.
Yeah. Yeah. Special sauce.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this 5,000 number. That were those given to you as actual goals, or was this just some lofty number thrown out there, or did they say to you, "Hey, we really want you to hit that"? What were the benchmarks that were given to you out of the gate that they expected from you, and I guess from the company overall?
We had a few development agents around the country and in Canada, just in the US at the time. And the development agents were area representatives, had a geographical area, which could be half a state, a full state. And they were responsible for selling franchises in the area. And I worked with them, along with them, to help them with their efforts, as well as my own areas where there was not a development agent. So those are the areas that I would be focused on, finding either a future development agent or just selling individual franchises. So when they made that goal of 5,000 locations in the 10-year period, this was something that the company was very serious about, and they had to reach this goal. So the thing is, okay, here's the goal. This is one serious goal. No one's ever accomplished anything like this. Now figure it out. And that was part of like figuring it out. And the way I kind of sum it up in a sense is that, it was almost like Fred DeLuca, watching the Kennedy, put a man on the moon and safely return him back to Earth. It was a simple and finite, concrete message. It didn't get into the weeds. It just said, we're going to get someone on the moon and we're getting him back. And this kind of reminded me of this.
Mm.
You're going to get 5,000 stores. We'll figure it out later, but this is the goal.
You're right. Right. It did a lot of people just sort of look on in disbelief. They think it wasn't realistic, was never going to happen. And yet, yourself, what did you think at the time?
Well, I figured that, hey, it took 20 years to get to 300 locations. Now, how are you going to get that 5,000 in 10? And so at first, it was a little like, okay, how are we going to do this? We had to figure it out. And then, so anyway, I was told when I was hired that, Fred made this goal and they're like a little worried, like, how am I going to accomplish this? Because he's going to push us on this and demand it. Years later, I was talking to Fred about it. And I said, when he came up with that goal, and this was after the 5,000 locations, this was years later. I said, when he came up with the idea of 5,000 locations, I go, how was that? Like, how was that interpreted? Like he goes, well, I did it. I did I told him about the 5,000. And when I did, they kind of like, I could tell that the audience was little, they weren't no sure what to think about it. And then I turned to my wife and I said, what's with them? They're not like jumping on this, He goes, well, I think maybe they think you're crazy.
Maybe.
But he told me the interesting thing was he calculated that there could be 8,000 locations, not 5.
Mm.
And he didn't want to tell him the 8 because they thought that he would be crazy. So he only told them the 5.
Right. Dropped it down a bit.
Yeah. And I didn't ask him this question about the 5,000 and when he came up with it until after it was reached.
Right.
Because I didn't want to say anything prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. So there you're tasked with these huge numbers. And I mean, things obviously went very well. What were some of the challenges that you were hitting when you were building?
Well, first of all, the goal did bring a lot of people together and people bought into it and they wanted to feel like they're part of something else that's much larger than themselves. So this energized everyone. You got to find the spark that ignites the passion. Fred DeLuca was an excellent leader, and he did that. And so this ignited the passion in people, and they bought into it. And that part of it, so everyone bought into it, and that's helped. Now the challenges were, you have equipment companies, and they're only sending you X amount of equipment per week. Next thing you know, now they got to ramp up the equipment. Now you got to ramp up the team. Now you got to add more people. All of a sudden, we went from one building that had about 35 people in it. The next thing you know, he's leasing other buildings around town to put us in because he's rapidly expanding.
Mm.
And he was wondering, he even told me years later, he wondered if he could keep up with it because there was too much of a demand. And so between that and then the professional advertising companies that were hired, they created a lot of great images and everything. And so as sales went up, then the existing franchisee said, hey, I'm doing better. So I'm going to buy more restaurants.
Right.
And so it was an incredible chain reaction. What happened
fell into place. And I think a lot of people sort of downplay the logistics behind rolling these locations out, right? Like you just walk into a store and turn on the lights and start making sandwiches, right? But there's so many, I mean, we have limited, but we still have involvement and have seen what's, even just a single location. So that extent just must have been huge. Must have been very, very exciting times.
Yes. And, because of his leadership ability of being so detail oriented, everything, the processes, everything was laid out. he figured everything out and he did it right. And he knew how to get these locations open fast because, he didn't have no cooking, no grills, nothing like that.
Yeah.
And that speeded up the process, the permitting process.
Hmm.
And so, you know, um, expanding the number of employees on the team. So all of that made a difference and helped speed up the process of getting the stores open faster.
What was it like working with Peter Buck, Dr. Buck, and Fred DeLuca? What were these guys like dealing with them one on one?
Fred DeLuca was the guy who was, he was there all the time doing everything. Dr. Buck was someone that you would rarely ever see. You knew that he was behind the scenes, but not at the forefront. Like he was not the face of Subway. He would come and visit once in a while, but he'd only be there for a birthday party or something like that, and then or go to a convention. Other than that, you wouldn't see him. Or maybe he would be at Fred's house when there's some event. But other than that, you didn't see him in the day-to-day operation. Fred ran everything. And
Right.
if you and there was many conversations I've had with Dr. Buck over the years, and basically, most of the conversations I ever had with him had nothing to do with Subway. They were basically, he was a nuclear physicist at GE. I'm a big fan of GE, and so I had something in common. He would talk to me about, you know, um, he would just talk to me about management there and stuff that he witnessed when he worked there. And I remember when the Subway's headquarters was built in 1989, I remember he came to take a visit, and I remember walking around with him, just him and I walking around, and he saw all these cubicles because we never had cubicles.
Hmm.
And he sees all these cubicles and he goes, yeah, he goes, that reminds me of the days of GE. I go, really? Yeah, they put cubicles and then you sat in there. Nobody'd even know what you were doing. And he was telling me this.
Right. Hiding spots.
Yeah. And I said to myself, wonder what he thinks now that he sees these. And then, at one time I remember having lunch with him in New Jersey with Dick Toshin, and Dick had some ideas about, I have some ideas which could increase sales on certain things on the menu. And he basically told Dick, he goes, they sound good, but you got to talk to Fred. I got nothing to do with that. And, like he's like, and Dick had told me that from day one. He goes, if you see him, don't talk to him about anything about Subway because he'll just tell you to talk to Fred. He
Right.
wants nothing to do with it. And that's the way it ran.
What about Fred DeLuca? What was he like?
Interesting person, very demanding. He was, he was a psychology major, not a business major,
Hmm.
but he knew how to take the psychology and apply it to his knowledge of business. And he made it work. Because when you think about the menu, you think about the store, you think about packaging, how do you sell franchises, a lot of those things that he was involved with.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was psychological, about the psychology of pricing and stuff like that, and the menu. And so he was much more behind the scenes than anyone ever imagined. He was, I don't think I've ever met a CEO who was that involved. Yes, he knew about delegating, but he also knew this was his baby and he was going to make sure it worked right. And he also had I think that he shouldered a lot of responsibilities knowing that not only he's got to make this work, but there are many families out there dependent on this. There are development agents in their family. There are the company employees. There are franchisees out there who are running the stores. And he wanted to make sure that they were profitable. And so the way I looked at it, you know, a lot of this weight on him, he wanted to make sure everything was working and he cared about it. And I'm telling you, the systems he designed about for franchise owners and being able to monitor their weekly systems and how well they're doing, like how the stores are doing and all the numbers and everything and making sure they got the best prices and everything. And he really, really cared.
Right.
I don't, I just don't, I don't think I've ever seen anybody who is that committed to making sure everyone was taken care of.
Right. Right.
It
And did
was, it
that
was
change?
amazing.
It sounds it. Yeah, it sounds it. Wait, did that change over time? I mean, it start off with this, relatively humble beginnings, treading the way to billion-dollar company. Did Fred change? Is he like driving
No,
around in a $1 million Rolls Royce, and you don't see him anymore, or was he the same guy from right start to end?
same guy start to end. Same guy. I
Mm.
mean, he would drive around in like he would keep cars for a long time. Like the one car he had last was he had a like almost a 10-year-old 10-year-old Acura,
Right.
and I think he had like a 10-year-old Lexus down in Florida.
Mm.
And he he wouldn't drive anything exotic. I
Right.
mean, he would like have Lincoln Continentals or not the most expensive one. You know, he wasn't he wasn't like that. Even though him and Dr. Buck were on Forbes list
Yeah.
as one of the wealthiest, they were not materialistic like that. You'd be
Hmm.
shocked. Most people would say, "Hey, I'd be buying a Rolls Royce," not him.
Right. Actually, yeah, you do hear that a lot. Like, Warren Buffett's still in his old house, right? It's yeah, a lot of people just don't go that route. And that, could be part and parcel of the reason that they've become so successful. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the negative issues over the years that Subway had to deal with. The yoga mat conditioner situation that happened. For a while, there was things coming out saying, "Oh, Subways aren't actually 12 inches." All these challenges. Wanted to get your feedback on how that was dealt with, and what your thoughts are, and how you sort of weathered the storms.
The interesting thing is, of everything that I had seen throughout the years, whether it's the yoga mat, whether it's the 12-inch, or whether someone's saying that some companies would come up with these activists about animal cruelty and chickens and eggs and all this stuff. Um, the yoga mat, the that conditioner was had the most damning effect
Mm.
of everything. And how I could tell was that I had the weekly reports of all the sales volumes of every area of the world. So I would track it. I would look at it. But also the number of people that were inquiring to become a franchise owner dramatically dropped that over any other controversy in the past.
Wow.
After that, I tracked it and I saw it. I said, whoa. Now, of course, it was said that what was in there was being used by other restaurant chains. To me, the lesson to be learned is that you look at everything that's in your ingredients, whoever the company is, whatever they're selling, look at it, just double check. Just because somebody tells you, hey, it's something that goes in there and this is what it does, you know, look at it and say, whatever it is, someone find something wrong with this, and what is it? And look into it deeply,
Mm.
because it may be widely accepted, and a couple of years later, someone says, "Hey, this is a chemical that is known to be," and no one's really paid attention to it, and it's just accepted as part of the ingredient. So I say, for any company, they've got to do their homework.
Right.
Take everything apart. That's what
Yeah.
you got to do.
Yeah. And, in fairness to Subway, it's not like they were the only ones putting this stuff. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of products, right? But they kind of caught the tip of the spear in that
Yeah, which
situation.
was weird.
Yeah.
But, because they're the largest chain, you also got to realize you're a target.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. Tall poppy syndrome, right?
Yeah.
They want to come after you for sure. Another big one as well, the public sentiment. There was a concern that Subway had oversold territories, right? You got these thousands and thousands of locations. Do you yourself feel? I mean, you were there, you saw how things happened. Do you think that Subway oversold too many territories that was negatively impacting franchisees?
There's two ways to look at that with this oversold territories that I would hear from people. And so here's what I would say. I had access to the statistics that, you know, not everyone's going to have access to. And it would tell you, how many franchise locations are opened within a particular territory, what are the sales volumes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I first started, the goal was one store for every 30,000 people. And as time went on, that goal moved from 1 to 50, 1 to 20, 1 to 15, 1 to 12. And it kind of was at 1 per 12. And then in certain areas, they tried 1 per 10,000 people to see what the sales volumes would be comparison to a higher density number of locations. Now, in some cases, there was a town, I remember in Indiana, it could have been Fort Bend, if I recall, was the first area that crossed the one store per 10,000 mark. One store for every 10,000 people. And the sales volumes were higher than the national average.
Wow.
Okay. In Milford, Connecticut, where the headquarters was, there was more subways per population than other areas, and the sales volumes were higher than the national sales volumes. Now, is this true in all cases? No. But I think the way Fred looked at it was A, convenience to the customer. So the more locations that there are up to a certain point, and you won't know what that is until they open.
Right.
Okay. That's the only way you're going to find out. And then, and it's not going to happen everywhere, but in certain cases it will. And then you'll find out what the demand is for the product. And so he looked at it, the convenience.
Right.
Did he want to see some people say, oh, he wants all these stores open and this would hurt franchisees? That's not the way he was.
Right.
Okay. Now, he also was smart enough to branch off into the non-traditional markets where he went into hospitals, schools, Walmart. So the thing with hospitals is, yeah, you can have a Subway store in town. You can put one in a hospital, let's say. Now, the same people in the going into the hospital to visit patients and everything, they're not the same ones who are coming out the door saying, oh, I'm going to get a Subway. It's a captured audience going in the stadiums and everything. So those things worked well. You saw the numbers. They're not the same customers. I do not think he oversold territories. And as a matter of fact, when there was times that there was declines, when there was beginning to see some declines in the number of units stores opened in some towns, I would go and look, and I would notice that actually the sales volumes in the other stores didn't actually go up. So I'm not sure what that meant. But I will tell you, I used to sit on the site review committee, one of the many different things I did. And then I saw how it worked. They came up with a system, was that before a location was signed a lease, they would send a letter to the owners that were close by and say, we're going to open one here. Do you object? If the owner says, I object, then they send someone to the store that objects, interviews the customers, called customer intercepts, finds out where they're coming. They'd videotape from the location proposed to the store that objected. It would come to headquarters. I would sit on that panel, look at everything over, and then a vote was made whether or not to move forward or not. And a discussion was discussed. And then from there, they spoke with the owner and everything and deciding if they were going to move forward or not. So, they actually went and talked to the customers and found out where you're coming from. So you can see the extra steps that were taken.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we watch it from the outside, right? Not having any, internal communication with what's going on. So it's really fascinating to me to see, okay, this is actually what was happening. But yeah, it makes sense.
What people didn't realize is that before Subway franchised, Fred DeLuca worked in the stores for 10 years, opening, closing, hiring people. So he saw all of that. He did all that work. And so when he decides I'm going to expand to be a franchisor because I'm not going to be able to reach my goal of how many stores we wanted to open when we set forward in 65, he was somebody who can definitely had empathy for the store owners and knowing what they did because he'd been there.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage, I would think, for sure. And a lot of franchises, they don't have necessarily that depth of experience, and they hire people that haven't been there. So yeah, I'm sure that was integral to the success, for sure. The fact that he had hands-on experience. What do you think is going to happen now that Subway's been taken over by private equity? No swear words. Let's keep it clean.
Well, I think it's going to be challenging because, it was this family-oriented business. But as the new CEO had taken it over from Subway in 2019, uh, he didn't from the people that worked there, they told me that I was there a short while and then I was gone after that, after he took over. But from my understanding of the people that worked there, that wasn't really he wasn't really the family oriented person that was going to take the company, keep that culture. He had one thing, and everyone pretty much knew why he was there.
Right.
He was there to increase sales and to put it up for sale. Nobody told you that, but they all knew that.
Yeah.
And he did it. And so I think it's challenging because, the company ran a certain way. Now, maybe most of the employees are not there anymore. They've been replaced. But a lot of the franchisees that are out there in the thousands of locations are people who bought into Subway when Fred was alive.
Right.
And during that culture. And, I've talked to many of them, and, they still have the loyalty to Fred, even though he's not with us, but they remember those days. And that's in the back of their mind, is like, that's who built this company.
Yeah.
So now I think it's going to be really challenging because, how do you transition to this? And then, private equity has a different objective than a family-owned business. I mean, some work, some don't. But if a private equity firm had owned Subway sometime 30 years ago, it would have never reached where it reached to the biggest chain.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think it would ever have happened.
Yeah.
It would have been sold a few times before it got to that.
Yeah, if at all, if it ever made it anywhere close.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I guess time will tell. We'll see where that goes. Last Subway related question. I saved the most difficult one till last. What's your favorite sandwich?
The veggie.
Veggie?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was my favorite. I don't know why. It's really crisp, right? I haven't had Subway in ages, but yeah, we don't have one around here. Bit close, but yeah, it's crisp, good tasting stuff. I had veggie and whole wheat.
Yeah. I still go in once or twice a month. I go in and get a Subway sandwich.
Is that right? Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that was the last Subway question. I wanted to just touch on, and we showed some questions initially on your bio that you do some movie stuff. You've been in some movies with some pretty big name players. How'd you get into that?
One of the guys I used to work with, well, my background is also video production.
Yeah.
So I went to school how to produce and direct video. So one of the guys that I used to work with at Subway was an actor, and then he still acts, but then he transitioned into producing movies. And so anyway, I knew him and he knew what my background was, and I always got along great with him. So when he started getting more into that role and started working with high-end producers, he said, "Hey, would you like to be in some of the stuff I'm working in?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So so then, I would be, cast in it, like, just some role in there, like in the background or whatever, and some of them were with he made sure that like I was in one scene as a crime scene detective, and I made sure that I was in the same scene to the side of Tommy Sizemore,
Yeah.
Or in the same movie there was Theo Rossi from Sons of Anarchy, and I was in a casino scene where took place in the 70s, and so I was in the scene at the table, and Theo Rossi was up more up front, so I was like in the same scene. So he made sure I kind of like those. He did me those favors.
That's cool. Yeah, it must be a lot of fun, I would imagine.
Yeah, I love it. I'm getting call. I'm waiting for the next call for the next one. So he wants me in, and that's it. Yeah, there's others that I've been in. So I like it. There's sometimes 12-hour days, but
Mm.
it's weird. It's like a 12-hour day, 12-hour day. Like, who cares? This is fun.
Yeah, exactly. Time flies when you're having fun.
Or they send you to a room and say, okay, here's a bunch of clothes from the 70s. Which one are you going to wear? Like, I haven't seen these clothes in the 70s. All of a sudden, I'm wearing them.
Rough gig. Funny, funny. Well, thanks so much again for coming on. This was a lot of fun, exciting stuff. And viewers, like and subscribe for more stuff. Ralph, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Robert.
You bet.